Welcome to this ORCID training video on Extender Workflow 201. This is more advanced training following on the Extender Workflow 101 video that is also available on the website. My name is Natalie, and today we will go through a very brief overview of workflow and look at some advanced configurator actions, such as how to build your own custom reassign actions, using SetField with a manual workflow, using the true-false conditions around SetField, showing messages and evaluating which programs you're coming from. Some advanced actions that control the flow of actions in the steps, such as doing different actions when there is already a workflow instance pending, or whether the view field update is based on an insert or an update of the record. We will look at using parameters in view events and scripts, as well as Information Manager. And then we will look at customizing the workflow using modules in Extender as well as custom actions, and then we'll touch on using the workflow in custom scripts. So reminder that Extender Workflow is part of the Extender module for Sage 300, applies to all Extender editions, and you can attach workflow to core and third-party Sage 300 modules, master files, transaction headers, and batches. Workflows is made up of steps, actions, values, parameters. Workflow history is tracked by Extender. In practice, you have a console to manage your approval requests and your tasks. You can also use icon on Sage 300 screens if you are configured as an ORCID user. For custom actions, you require Extender Customizer or Developer Edition. In the previous training video, we looked at logging new records being inserted and how we populate the console fields using set drill down, set status. We expanded on that workflow template to alert users and user groups, sending them some emails. We control the flow of actions in a workflow using Evaluate, Go to Step, and Progress to. We updated view fields using SetField, interacted with the logged on user by prompting a user for value and displaying messages back to the users. The focus of this video is a few other advanced workflow actions that are part of Extender. So why are we looking at some of these more advanced configurator actions? Well, first, what we're going to try and do in this training is make sure that the workflow are easy to maintain. We're going to develop more granular control over the workflow so that we can do sequential versus parallel approval. What do we want to do when an approval is pending? We need to make sure we handle exceptions, and we need to also ensure that the integrity of the approval process is enforced by the workflow. So if I have a workflow that sets a GL account to inactive, I don't want any user who has access to update the GL to set the account to active without using the workflow. And this will also ensure that the console helps with productivity and managing outstanding tasks rather than have duplicate details on the console. The examples we're going to look at are building our own custom reassign action so that we can, for example, send an email to a user who's being reassigned a workflow, looking at using the true-false conditions on the SetField action, how to use SetField when we're using a manual workflow, making sure we use Evaluate program before using ShowMessage. So what we will do is start off in a Sage 300 database where Extender and Information Manager latest product update are installed and activated. Extender email has been configured, Information Manager has been installed, and ORCID user has been configured in the tray. You can refer to an introductory video on Extender workflow training, as well as to our detailed training video or detailed presentation video on AR customer on hold manual workflow. You also have an AP payment batch approval workflow detailed video, as well as a presentation on how to use the workflow to approve a batch before an EFT file can be created for that payment batch. In the previous video, we built a workflow that is triggered when a GL account is inserted. So we're going to add a few improvements to that workflow. Firstly, We currently have a workflow where in the assign user step, we set it to a manager being a workflow user group in Sage 300. But what we want to do to make it easier to maintain is, and to make it easier to move between a test server and a live server, is to configure this as a parameter. So we will pass the parameter from the view events where the workflow is attached to the Sage 300 view. We're going to add a description here. And parameter 1 is the workflow approver. So let's do that first. Replacing this user by parameter. And the first parameter is $1, second parameter is $2, and you can have up to 4 parameters. So if we look at view events, script and workflow, I can choose my parameter here. We'll save this. Now when I run the workflow, the first step is going to assign the user to the manager workflow. But if I don't change my workflow and I just change my setup here to assign the workflow to Dan, then when I create a new GL account, the workflow is going to be assigned to Dan. So let's add a new account, 1032. You can see that account 1032 has been assigned to Dan. But in many cases, you'd want to use that parameter in subsequent steps of the workflow. So what you do for that is, in your first step, and we'll do it towards the top, so let's insert a new row here, we're going to store the parameter value in a workflow value. So for that, we're going to use set value, and we're going to put that in a workflow value called approver, and the value we're going to pass to this workflow value is $1, my parameter 1. After that, I'm going to go to 40, and before that, I need to change this one to go to this new action that I've inserted. And then in my assign user, I don't need to use the parameter anymore. I can use the variable, the value, workflow value. So let's add account 1033. Check on the workflow console. And if I check the values, you can see that now I've got a value in my workflow called approver set to Dan. So that workflow value, it will be available in the workflow history, and I can use it in subsequent steps of the workflow. And for manually configured workflow, you can also set up to 4 parameters when you go from this icons that start the workflow. It's configured in Information Manager options, and they can be read by the workflow. And you can see more details on that in the AR Customer Manual Workflow video. So we've seen how to use parameters. Let's now look at the reassign action. All workflows on the console always have a reassign action. All it does is prompt you to select another user. But you may want your own custom reassign action so that you can, for example, send an email to the user. So let's look at that now. I'm going to add a new action called Reassign. And what it's going to do is add a parameter, new user. The type is going to be user, no default value. And the next, ask for parameters. If that's successful, we're going to assign the workflow to that user. So I'm assigning the workflow to the new user, and then I'm going to send an email to that new user. And you may remember that you have access to some of the workflow variables by going in the F9 zoom screen and clicking on the help in there. And we'll make it all caps. It will look better and be more consistent. So this reassign action does not change the step, so I can call it from any action. The step in the status will remain the same. All it's doing is reassigning the user, so I don't need to do anything else than that. So let's save this and look at our workflow console. So let's reassign this to Natalie. If I look at the history, I can see that it's been reassigned, and I also have received my email. When we use this show message action in the workflow, we always want to make sure we use the Evaluate program at the same time to ensure that a message box doesn't pop up if the view is used in a third-party program that doesn't use the Sage 300 screens but uses the Sage 300 views. So here in our new account step, we have this Evaluate program equals GL 1100, which shows a user message to say that the workflow has started and the account has been made inactive. This Sage 300 message box will only show if you're using the GL 1100 screen. And this is to avoid apparent hanging when the show message function in Sage is called, but you're not actually on a screen. So it's a really important one to remember. When you're using SetField in the workflow needs to know what Sage 300 view you want to update. If your workflow is attached to an actual view in View Event Scripts and Workflow, like our example, then the workflow knows the view ID. If you're attaching the workflow to start manually to a screen, you need to configure the workflow. You need to tell the workflow which view to use. What you have to do here is use set value, and the field is going to be view ID, and then you put the view that you want to use. So in our example, the view is GL23001 GLAMF. So if it's true, and then you can set a field in the workflow. And there's a detailed example of that in the AR customer manual workflow video that is on the website. Now, if we stay with SetField for a moment, the true and false action for SetField are particularly important because often in approval workflow, one of the key things that we do is reset the field back to the original value in the initial step and set the field to the new value in the approval step. So if that action actually fails, we really want somebody to be informed. So typically with SetField, if it's true, we just continue with the workflow. But if there is an error, we're going to go to an error handling step. 30 is going to be, let's say, complete. But 40 is going to be go to step error management, and we're going to create that step. Now that step can do what is relevant for your business and for the type of errors that you're going to deal with, but in most instances it's going to suggest assign the user to, let's say, some admin user group, and then it's also going to send an email to admin. And we'll see another example of that in the next step, but I wanted to touch base on that because we're talking about SetField. So SetField and manual workflow, you need to use set value before you can use it, and in the false action of the false condition of SetField, you want to make sure you have some sort of error handling, minimum sending an email to an admin user to inform them. or do an error management step. We're going to remain with our GL account because most people who use Sage 300 have at least one GL account. And we're going to change pace a little bit with that inserting with that new workflow approval and look at what we would consider some sort of approval workflow best practices. In our existing example, we can amend our mark as read step to actually become an approved step. So when I click that step, the workflow is made active and the starter of the workflow, the person who submitted that request, is informed. However, that does not stop anyone from updating the field directly in Sage 300. So what we're going to do now is revisit that GL account workflow to be attached to the active field, to the status field on the GL account, so that when somebody sets it to active, the workflow still kicks in. So that will cater for new accounts as well as updates of existing accounts. The scenario is that new balance sheet accounts need to be approved by a manager. When an account is made inactive, the accounts team needs to be informed, and approval is also required for an inactive account to be reactivated. To achieve this in one workflow template, we will attach a GL Activate Account workflow to the active field in the GL account Sage 300 view called GL AMF or GL 0001. For a new account, when a new account is inserted in Sage 300, we're going to check whether it's a balance sheet account. If it is not a balance sheet account, we'll complete it. If it's a balance sheet account, we will go through the new account workflow. Once we start the new account workflow, the first thing we will do is make the status inactive so that the account cannot be used in transactions. And then we'll be waiting for approval for the new account. And a user can then reject or approve the account. The Activate GL account is when a user sets the status to active on the Sage 300 screen. When that happens, because we want the workflow to control this field, we will reset the status to inactive and then work out whether there is a pending workflow or not. If there is already a pending workflow, we'll complete the new instance and wait for the approval. If there is no pending workflow, we will start the Reactivate account workflow. And from there, the record can be approved or rejected. If a user in Sage 300 sets the status to inactive, we're going to start the Deactivate GL account step. And the focus of this presentation is going to be on the entry step, where we use the more advanced configurator actions such as isInsert, isUpdate, if workflow exists, to work out what branch of the workflow we want to be in. So our entry step, as many other workflows, will include standard actions to set the drill down, in this case to the GL account and the GL history, set description to the GL account description, and set some values that are read from the parameters that we configure in View Event Script and Workflow. In our example, we're passing as a parameter the user who can approve the account. And then our first decision point is this account inserted? If it is inserted, we start the new account workflow and first check whether it is a balance sheet account using the Evaluate action. If it is a balance sheet account, we follow our approval process as per the previous presentation, Extender 101. If it is not a balance sheet account, we complete the workflow immediately as no approval is required. If the account is not inserted, it means it's an update, and we are going to have different path whether the requested status is active or inactive. So once we've evaluated the status that is requested, if it is set to inactive, we start the Deactivate account step, which will prompt for a reason and then notify the team and complete the workflow. If the user is setting the field to active, requesting an activation, the first thing we will do in the workflow is reset the status to inactive, as we only want the workflow to set the field to active. And then we will use the if workflow exists to work out whether there is a pending workflow, in which case we're going to display a message, complete this instance of the workflow and leave just one pending. Or if there is no pending workflow, we will start the reactivate account step, which will assign the workflow to a user and set the status. Let's now have a look at Sage 300 and see how we configure such a workflow template. We're going to start with a blank template, create some steps, and look at the detailed actions required in this entry step. Let's add a GL Activate Account workflow, which will be attached to the active field on the GL account view. It's active. It will be attached to the view, so I can't start it manually. And I'm going to leave auto delete to no, so that I can see all my different branches going to the console even when they get completed as I'm testing. So the first thing I'm going to do is add the high level steps as per my flowchart. So I've inserted the key steps of the workflow from my flowchart. Check status, various branches, and wait, approve, and reject, and our error step. Focusing now on the check status step, let's add the key actions there. We've added our initial configuration actions that will apply across the different branches of the workflow, setting the approver from the parameter, setting the drill down to the GL account screen, and setting the description to the actual GL account description and the account type that we're doing. We're now reaching our first new action and decision point. So let's add action 40, and action 40 is going to be insert. So this one doesn't have any parameters, and if it's true, if it is an insert, I'm going to go to my new account branch, and if it's not, I'm going to go to, let's say, 60. 50 is going to be go to step, start new account. And 60, so if it's not an insert, what do? I'm going to check, is it an update? Again, there is no parameter for this action. And if it is an update, I'm going to go to 70. And if it's not an insert and not an update, let's say I'm going to go to 100. Again, we can see per our flowchart, if it is an update, the main thing we want to do is work out what is whether the status is set to active or inactive. So I'm going to use the evaluate action for this on the active field. So a reminder that we can use extender setup view info to check the field names if we don't know them. If the active status is set to 1, so the requested status is 1, I'm going to go to my step 80. If it's not 1, I'm going to go to 90. So I'm going to go to this step, activate account. And if the requested status is inactive, I'm going to go to the deactivate account step. And then 100 was, I'm not an insert, I'm not an update. In this particular example, I'm going to make it complete. So let's save this. We can now attach this workflow to our active field in View Events, Scripts and Workflow. Go to the Workflow tab. I'm going to make this one inactive for now. And then I'm going to insert a new row. And I'm going to apply that to my active field. Let's choose a workflow, the Activate Account workflow, and choose my entry step, check status, and pass the parameter. I'm going to say that Anne is the approver. I could use a workflow user group as well. Let's save this So when I start a new account, checking the account type, if it's not a balance sheet account, evaluate account type equals B is false. I go to step 90, which is setting the status to no approval, and then going to the complete step. If it is a balance sheet account, true action goes to 20. I'm setting a status to new account, setting a field, the active flag to 0, inactive, so that it can be approved by the workflow. If I'm calling this view from the GL account entry screen, I'm showing a user message to say that the account has been made inactive until approved. Assigning a color, assigning a user being the approver, and you may remember that the approver was passed as a parameter and that we have saved the value away in the check status step. And then we send an email to the approver and we go to the step wait, new. So let's add a new balance sheet account. Getting my message that the account has been made inactive until approved. If I refresh my console, I can see that it's been assigned to Anne, it's red, and it's going to the step wait, waiting for new approval, and I've got some buttons that say approve or reject. I still have my drill down available. Now I'd like to focus on the activate account step. So when I'm setting the status to active. So when I'm activating the account, as per our workflow, the first thing we're going to do is reset the field to 0, inactive. If this is successful, we're going to check whether the workflow exists or not. If it is not successful, we're going to go to the error management step. The new action we're looking at now is if workflow exists. Doesn't take any parameters. If it's true, means there is a pending workflow. We're going to go to next action. And if it's not true, let's do that one quickly. If there's a pending workflow, complete this instance. This is what we're going to do next. If no workflow, we go to the reactivate. So if the workflow exists, we said we're going to update the workflow status to complete existing workflow. And then we're going to show the user a message. Remember, we only show messages if we are using a Sage 300 screen, as in the message will not appear if I'm running a custom program that uses a Sage view, but that doesn't use a Sage screen. And then if I see that, I'm going a step to complete. And if I'm not showing a message, actually I'm also going to go to complete, so I'm going to change this to say 46. Let's renumber, save, and check what we are doing in this activate account workflow. I'm resetting the field to inactive. If that is not successful, I'm going to go to an error step. If that is successful, I'm going to check if a workflow exists. And if the workflow exists, I'm showing the message and completing that workflow. If the workflow does not exist, I go to step reactivate the account. So now let's add the actions for reactivate the account. And in this particular example, reactivating an account is going to simply set the status to assign the user, use the finder for a change, and the user is going to be the same in this example, the approver. And then I'm going to go to step, wait, reactivate, save. And the final thing we need to do, go to this wait, reactivate, and check what steps we can progress to. We've already configured those, so we can go to approve and passing the comment, approve, reactivate, or to reject. So let's try this from the console. We've got this one, which is 1031. So I can drill to that account. Make this active on the screen. It's telling me there is a pending workflow and I should use the console to approve. So if I come back to my console, I can see that the workflow has been completed. Step name is blank and the status has been set to complete pending workflow. And my existing pending workflow record is still there and I can from here approve or reject. This account was inactive. If I try to make it active and save, it has been reset to inactive. And if I check my console, I can see that it's waiting to be reactivated. And I have my approve and reject button ready to go. We've seen two scenarios where the GL account workflow sets the record to waiting for approval for a new account or waiting for an approval to reactivate. From these waiting status, a user can use the console to either reject or approve the new account or the reactivating of an old existing account. In our business scenario, whether it's a new account or reactivating an inactive account, follow the same process except we're going to pass a different parameter. And the reject and the account and the approve also have a fairly similar process. So for the purpose of this training, we're only going to look at the approval step. The approval step can come from two pending steps. Using the progress to, we're storing a parameter approval new or approval reactivate. So the first thing I'm going to do in this workflow is to store the parameters that are configured in my progress to with the comment. Once I've done that, I'm going to do one little validation to confirm that the account details are complete. And in this example, I'm going to use a custom action to check whether the GL description is filled in or not. If the details are complete, I go back to wait. However, if the details are complete, I'm going to prompt the user to enter a comment if they want to. If they enter a comment, I'm then going to make the account active. And if that's successful, I'm going to inform the starter of this workflow that the account has been approved, and I'm going to set the workflow status to approved. If I have any issue updating the status to active, for example, if the user does not have rights to update GL accounts, I will go to the error management step. And if for some reason on the screen the user cancels out of that screen, I'm also going back to the step wait. So let's look at this now in Sage 300. So you may remember that in wait new, we've configured a parameter when we go to approve or reject with a comment. So when we go to approve, it's approve new. When we go to reactivate, it's approve reactivate. We want to store that comment in the workflow when we get to the approve step. So to do that, we're going to use the set value action. The field we want to save away, we're going to call it workflow comment. And then the value we're passing to is parameter 1, which is a comment from the previous step. And to do that, you do curly bracket $1. As per our flowchart, the next thing we want to do is make sure that the account details are complete. In our example, we're checking that the GL description is not blank. So you could do that with a simple evaluate action. But for the purpose of this training, I want to show you how to use a custom action to do that. I've previously created a module with a custom action that checks whether the GL accounts are incomplete. So I'm going to import this module. Let's check the script that we've got. And it's checking whether the fields in my field list, in this case only the account description, are complete or not. And if any one field is incomplete, then it's returning, the action is returning false. So here I've got my workflow check GL details complete actions available. And it doesn't actually have any parameter. I should have commented that out in the script. And if it is true, If the details are complete, then I'm going to go to the step where I'm prompting the user for comment. If not, I'm going to go to back to wait. So to prompt a user for a comment, I'm going to add a parameter. It's going to be a text, and I don't want it to be too long. Let's say 60 character. And after add parameter, we always need to go to ask for parameter. So I'm going to add that action. If that is successful, the user clicks OK. I'm going to set the account to active and inform them. If they click cancel, then I'm going to be back to wait. To set the account to active, I'm going to use SetField. And my field is still active SW. And I'm going to set it to 1 this time. If that is successful, I'm going to go to 60. If that is not successful, I'm going to go to my error step. 60 is, as per our flowchart again, send an email to the starter. So we're going to do this. And if I don't remember my template name, I'm going to check it here. Or if I need to create a new template. So now I should create a new one. And because I'm emailing starter, I don't need to set it to, but I could CC myself. And the next step is going to be to set the status of the workflow to approved. And finally, I can complete my workflow. So that was the successful branch. Now I still need to do my 2 error conditions. So one of them was go to step wait new. And the other one is go to step error management if I have an issue updating the field, activating the field. So let's save this and try it out. And I can try that from the console. I have this account 1000, which is waiting to be reactivated. So if I click approve here, I can enter a comment. So you can see the status is now approved. And again, I can look at my history, see when it was approved, by whom, click on values. I can see that my workflow comments came from approve, reactivate. My approval comment entered on the screen has been saved away in here. Let's now add a new account to do a full round of testing of this. And somehow I managed to save it without any details. So maybe it's been inserted through a custom program that didn't validate the description or something like this. So anyway, I've now got this account. If I go to my workflow console, I can see that account 1039 is here waiting. If I try and approve it, I'm going to get a message saying that I've got incomplete GL details. So if I want to complete this account, I'm going to put in a description, save it, and I can come here and approve. If I check my values, I can see that it's come from the approve new, and I look at the history to see that it went to new, went back to wait for new from approval because the details were incomplete, and now it's gone from approved to no step name, which means the workflow is completed. So we've now configured a workflow template that is pretty typical of any workflow that you would attach to any master file or transaction header file where you want an approval in certain conditions. In the GL account example, we set the field to inactive. With an AE order, you might set the order to on hold if you want an approval. You can then attach a workflow to the on hold flag. So this is our main workflow. Just a reminder as to what we've done in this presentation. We've started the workflow, done a branch if it's a new account that doesn't require approval, if it's a new account that requires approval, if it's an account that needs to be deactivated, or if it's a new account that needs to be activated. To do this, we've used primarily workflow configurator actions, ones that are covered in Extender 101 training video, like set value, set drill down, set description, evaluate, send email, assign user. And then some more advanced actions like is insert, is update, and if workflow exists. And we've also introduced custom actions. In this case, to send a Microsoft team or to send an optional field value. In our proof step, we have used a custom action to check whether the account was, all the details had been entered or not. So the online documentation has tutorials and examples released regularly, including some of our best practice tips. The knowledge base also has some details and some best practices on what to do with a workflow. But the key message that we have for you is to make sure that you focus on the business process. Make sure it's clear what you're trying to achieve. And if you have that nicely documented, you'll very quickly be able to say, okay, this is using 100% configurator actions in Extender, or the bulk is configurator actions, but I need one or two small custom actions like we had in this example to see whether the GL account description had been filled in or not. So thanks for your time.